recommendations.
Yes, I believe that's correct.
So
It
I
says
move to amend the minutes to reflect that those
They
two
were adopted, two recommendations were adopted.
Second.
Everybody recognize what he said there?
No.
It says that they were, the motions they asked to accept under each one.
Yeah, actually, if you read the actual 1 and 2, but it's okay to say they were adopted. But it actually says it in the 1 and 2, that they were passed.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, that's fine. Then there's no need for an amendment.
okay, withdraws this motion. Is there any other corrections to the minutes? Anybody see?
Move to approve the minutes.
Been moved, is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion's adopted. First thing we're going to do is our subcommittee that we set up at the last meeting met this morning, and they're going to present their report. So I'll call upon the chairman of the subcommittee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, we have two proposals that will go before you. The first one I'm going to take the bottom one first, and that is that the legislature make appropriation of PEIA funding within the 16 days following the State of the State address. That will be the Friday, 2 weeks after the Friday of 2 weeks after the State of the State. That is a recommendation that we make to the legislature. The legislature, since it's a statutory change, will be the one that will have to make the change in the statute. Senator Blair has a draft bill that's ready upon our approval that he is going to introduce. The purpose behind this is the governor makes his financial statement to the PEIA by October 15th under the statute. Many times the legislature would wait until the end of the session or even the week after the session under the budget to approve a budget for PEIA and everything. That puts the finance board under some time constraints, and PEIA under time constraints to finalize a plan and everything else. This gets it so that the adoption or whatever changes they're making to the revenue for PEIA is done early in the session so that the plan can go forth and we know more about what to do. I will move this on behalf of the subcommittee and let you know that it was a unanimous vote of the subcommittee.
All right, you've heard the motion of the Democrat, second of the committee, subcommittee chair. Just might add one thing, that basically it says that the number is finalized. Technically, it's not appropriated until the budget passes, but it would lock it in so that it couldn't be changed from that point on. Just a little comment. Yes, question.
Mr. Chair, I was at the committee this morning, so in full disclosure, I voted for it knowing that it would come to this group. I guess my general question is, and you've addressed, and maybe Senator Blair did too, address the issue of committing the legislature to an issue before the budget's done, and I'll let you smart people deal with that. But I guess my question is, so let's say the number is $1 billion. We say PEI needs $1 billion. And then the revenue goes downhill in a couple months, and then we pass a bunch of bills that require more money. And the budget, is either out of balance or they have to come up with ways to balance that. Does that mean we have to start making cuts to other places because this number is locked and it can never be changed? Or is it just a recommendation? I don't know enough about the budget process, but I'm concerned with things like we come up short of 50 million or 100 million, and then somebody says, well, let's cut Medicaid by 50 million because we have a shortfall, and then we lose the federal match there because we have this $1 billion committed to. And $1 billion's a number I'm getting for discussion.
Here would be my comment to that, and then not to argue one way or the other, but to say that ordinarily, most of the line items in the budget remain pretty stable throughout the session. You're talking about a revenue projection for the following fiscal year, so that it's in theory, I mean, if the number were pretty darn scary, the question is, you're going to deal with the scariness of it in the first 16 days or or the first 6 or the 60.
That's what I was wondering.
And the advantage to the PEIA group, this was the conversation for the full committee, the advantage to the PEIA staff and director and board was that since the number would be stabilized pretty early, they could then go through all the process they've got to go through in the spring of the year to get everything published and get everything out the door. And that's what this is all about. It's not an attempt to create a burden on the budget process. The question would still have to be vetted by the finance committees. This is only a recommendation. I mean, I'm sure if this bill goes before the legislature, they find that to be a concern, they'll do something about it. But that's all this was, as I listened to the committee.
Yeah. Like I said, I was there. I just wanted to put some clarity on it because I was thinking
I
back.
mean, we've had one instance in our budgeting where the legislature can't do anything about it. Of course, we just removed it with a constitutional amendment. And that's when the Supreme Court says, here's the money we need, you can't turn them down. So you've had one instance of that. Whether you like that or not, I have no zeal either way. I mean, it's just that's the idea.
I'd like to weigh in.
Sure.
On this a little bit. I don't have much concern about this at all, and the reason for it is that we can anticipate in many cases, and we're talking about a matter of 44 days. If anything, this makes it so that there's an awareness and being able to actually prioritize of what's going on with this. Keeping in mind that this piece of legislation would have to go through and pass the muster of both the House and Senate and the governor as well on that. But it got us away from when we were talking about whether to use a fiscal year or a calendar year. It didn't solve all the problems, but it solved some of them to where we could actually be able to make it so the PEIA board could do a better job of managing and being able to get out the information that they needed to the recipients. With that said, I believe that this piece of legislation is actually worth the risk. And because the risk that I'm saying is there is minute. On that, we deal with this also when the 60-day session ends. You can still have downturns in the economy, downturns in revenue, and we still have to deal with it then as well. So that doesn't, the 44 days that we're looking at by actually prioritizing and putting this on, I see this as a good way of moving forward on it and being able to address it. I wholeheartedly support this. And like any other piece of legislation, if we find out that it is actually not working the way we intended, you go back and you address it again. Things change, but as it stands right now, I think it's workable. And so did some of my colleagues that when we were sitting down working this out. And I say colleagues, I don't know why I should name Michael. I'm going to name Michael Cook. Michael knows the budget probably better than anybody in the state of West Virginia. And so to call him in and to get his advice on that. So of course the chairman down there doesn't want to be yay or nay on this, but he was involved in the conversation as well. And no chairman should actually be trying to influence the members of the committee to begin with. That's my opinion now. I think I'm done. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else want to address it? Saw her name now.
Okay, if I could, what does this do, not discussing the time that's put on for the legislature to deal with? But can you be more specific about what this does exactly, what it means to members?
What it means to members, may I address that?
Sure.
what it does for members is it lets you know early in January, or that what's being appropriated to PEIA. It takes the governor's numbers, it takes the legislative numbers, and you know early what the plan is going to be, how it's going to be funded, and what effects that has on the next year's plan. And then it gives you time for the PEIA Finance Board to actually devise the plan, adopt the plan that people know well in advance. Because in a gubernatorial election year, it may be, because the session starts in February, it may be in middle of April, and even the budget month, budget week after that, well into April before the money's appropriated. Well, everything, the plan pamphlets have already gone out and stuff then, or need to go out. This gives you plenty of time to know exactly what the effects it's going to have on plan participants.
Thank you.
So in the law itself on page 3, you currently have a statutory requirement that the governor notice the finance board no later than October 15th. So that number is published, and in theory, what this is doing is saying that October 15th number, if it changes, it'll be known by this date. But they go out with that October 15th number and do the public hearings based on the number of money they've been told they're going to have in October. That's the current law. What this basically says is that there won't be any changes to that of any radical nature beyond the second week of the legislature. It just basically tries to stabilize what's a process that's already there, where the participants are noticed. So that's what the law. Delegate Bates, sorry.
Thank you, Chief. I fully appreciate the intent of this, and I do agree that what we're looking for is predictability. And we've heard from members that that's one of their concerns. We've also heard from PEA the practical applications of them not knowing what their appropriation is going to be until late in the year, the implications that has in terms of plan design. The word final challenges me a little bit. I understand this is legislation that will go through both chambers, and that, so the word final is used in Parliament. What does final mean? And then I did want to raise, and I'm not suggesting that it would preclude this, but there is some constitutional issues, I understand, that deal with the budget bill that relate to neither house being able to consider an appropriation until the budget bill has been finally acted upon. So I did want to raise those issues. I don't think this necessarily stands in the way of us moving forward with this. But there may be budgetary, but also some legal questions that need to be addressed in terms of how we're able to address this issue. So subsection C, Article 51. So binding the legislature. So I'm not sure what final means. So I would just pose those things for consideration as we move forward, that while the intent I think is correct, the practical application of this with monies moving through the budgetary process through the finance committees may become an issue. So
I'll let the chair move the.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to it. Number one is that this is a draft piece of legislation on my side. You can actually walk away from here and do the same thing. Let's not look at this as a piece that we're legislators. Let's look at it as we're trying to send a message to the legislature on what's going on. I myself, this is where we're at, and I fully anticipated to have to go through the legislative process, and at that point in time, you have concern. I want all 134 eyes on top of this, and then that's where the perfection begins. But we walk away from this meeting here today knowing that the intent of the task force itself collectively was that we supported this idea. But more than anything, the reason you have this in front of you is that we had this discussion. I got certain people down here, I got the lawyer down here, and we got the bill drafted and to begin, to show that there's a desire to be able to get these things done in an expedited fashion. So that's why you have the legislation set in front of you. So we think it's close, but that's where your talent and everybody else is coming into play in the legislature to be able to get it right.
Thank you. Question. Let's just say, like last year, the governor finds some additional revenue money at the end of the session. I mean, would this preclude adoption of this, and you say it works its way all through the legislative process, preclude you from utilizing any of that money for PEIA? So you're just saying this doesn't mean anything? I mean, if it's final, it's final.
May I go?
Yes, and we could have Jeff and I talk to him about why he drafted the language this way, but sure, go ahead.
You want to address it? You want me to? You go to Lloyd.
You do it.
I mean, I don't care.
I think it's final in terms of planning purposes for PEIA and their participants.
Okay, so if the legislature found more money, or the governor raised the revenue estimates on day 50, so now you've already made final your contribution to PEIA.
Bill purposely left out the word appropriation so that the legislature had the ability to account for situations such as that.
Yes, that's right. It doesn't say appropriates. If you tie it to,
Well, what does it do?
well, here's what, let me read 2 lines and then you'll see. If you turn to page 3, paragraph 4, it begins to make sense. It says sentence 2, for each fiscal year, the governor shall provide his or her estimate to the total revenues to the finance board no later than October 15th of the preceding fiscal year. So there's already a requirement on the part of the governor to tell the PEIA task force, to tell the PEIA board, hey, here's your money, so then they can go out and talk about the benefits, plus or minus, that they will adopt based upon that revenue. The machinery is already operating. Where the stress, and then you'll see that the underline says the estimated available revenue figure, which has already been given in October, shall be final by the 16th day of the legislature. So it's basically saying we're trying to give some predictability to the finance board so they can do their work. That's all.
And the predictability to the recipients, the users of it as well.
Right.
So that there's a better communication and more timely communication.
And I can tell you that the advocates for PEIA, or the people keeping an eye on PEIA, keep close watch on that October 15th letter. Many of you don't, but I can tell you in my experience now, 2 years going through this, there are people in this room that know what that October 15th number is and want to explain. So, you ready? I mean, it's all right, but I just, I would give it more explanation.
Call the question.
Somebody's called the question. Well, are you actually doing that, or will we let the delegates speak? Delegate.
Thank you, Chief. Likewise, I think fully support this, knowing from experience this large line item getting out of the way. This will get debated in both chambers for 16 days at the beginning of session. When we start late, it requires 3 readings in each chamber. Something maybe more appropriate to be considered would be a 30-day, so that we have this large line item out of the way in the first half of session. But 16 kind of cramps us, but you all are going to have time to debate that.
It's amendable.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a good comment. There was nothing magic about 16 days.
This thing will start with high number and end up with 60.
Yeah.
We all know the game was played here.
And again, this is the recommendation of the task force that shows that we are addressing issues and trying to come up with fixes, so to speak, for the employees out there. The legislation, of course, we will have our say in legislative hearings and those types of things like that. But we shouldn't be debating the legislation at this time. We should be debating the motion to make the recommendation, in my opinion.
I'll call the question.
All right, that's the question. Call for a second.
Second.
All right. Ready to vote? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. The ayes have it, the ayes do have it, motion is adopted. All right.
The second, Mr. Chairman, the second recommendation from the subcommittee is proposed changes to the PEI 80/20 rule. And you can see that the legislative share shall be at least 80%, and the employee share shall be no more than 20%. The Finance Board is authorized to impose the employee share through increases in premiums and/or increases in deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance, and wellness incentives. And the incentives is the key word in that sentence. The 80/20 split shall be based not on total premiums, but on the growth in the future projected PEI expenditures. The legislature shall be responsible for appropriating at least 80% of the growth in PEI's projected expenditures, provided that if the legislature has appropriated more than 80% of the growth in PEI expenditures in the previous year, their share of the growth of the expenditure for the next year plan may be reduced from the percentage of 80% appropriated in the previous year, but may not go below 70%. And what this does, in years that the state wants to appropriate 100% of the cost, and they may go 2 years with 100% of the cost. In the third year, we have revenue problems. This allows them to go to 70% of the cost rather than 80%. Recognizing that they had contributed 100% of the cost the 2 previous years, and the employee had no cost for it 2 years. This kind of smooths it out, so to speak. We did that at the 70% threshold because we didn't want the legislature to appropriate 100% for 2 years, and then the third year say, oh, but we are only doing 60% this next year.
All right.
And I move it on behalf of the committee.
That's the motion. Is there questions?
I have a question. So if they do 84% 1 year and the next year they don't have the money, it has to be 76,
They could go as low
They
as
could
that.
go as low as 76.
not clear down to 70.
No.
Just the amount that they paid over 1 year, they can only go that low max.
Yes. But if they gave 100% and they didn't have the
Can't go
money
below
next
70.
year, they couldn't go to 60%, they could only
Right.
go to 70%.
Can I add just a little bit to it?
Sure.
All right, I recognize Senator. Run.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's all right, you can run.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I'll do it. I'll run the question for you. Yes, sir. Senator Clark.
Okay, I just wanted to elaborate just a little bit. I call it banking. Because if the legislature, if you're putting in more than 80%, 85 or 90, whatever the number is, but you could, I don't want it set up so that you can put in 80 and 80 and you come in and say, hey, we want 70, or to go up 70. Well, that's not what the agreement is here, what we're trying to do. But you did 85 and 85, and then you had a bad year the following year. You 100 works number 2. But there's no way that I would say that you do 80, 80, 85, 80 again, and then you end up trying to do 70. That's not what and so that's not drafted, but the mission is that you're banking a little bit of reserve, not a lot, because you can't push it all out onto the recipients like that, but it's allowing a little bit of flexibility.
Does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Delegate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Chair. What's included as the 80/20 rule is actually in the code on page 4, line 92, 93. Would it be the intent that this language be codified, that it would be picked up?
that would be up to the legislature on whether they drafted a separate bill for this or included it in.
It's in the same section of code. So on
Yeah.
page 4, line 92, 93, it says shall be of 80% for the employer and 20% for the employee. So are we proposing including this language in the bill that we're recommending to go through the legislature?
I didn't get to this part of it because I wanted to hear what the meeting was taking place. That's why you don't see it in here. And I said I thought we should keep it separate as we moved it through, at least for right now. That's why, because you're looking at my bill, a proposal. If this is not part of that, but it has the potential to be put in there, we had that discussion, but we need to hear what the committee's going to do for that. I almost regret turning this in here, for that matter, because everybody's debating the bill, than what the proposal is. So, you're right, it falls in, we had that discussion.
So I'll let further discussion occur, but at the appropriate time, if it would be appropriate to make an amendment, then I would make the amendment to include the language that's proposed here and what's proposed here.
We'll do this like doing a legislative process. This will be the question phase, and if there are any more questions, then we'll go to the amendment.
Mr. Chair, but once again,
I'm just talking about the process.
yeah, once
Question.
again, if I may, once again, we're debating the proposal from the task force. We're not debating the bill, and the recommendation should come from the task force to make these changes. Then we will deal with the legislative process on where those changes go and how they are in the bill. And I'm sure that we will have input in the discussions on those changes legislatively too.
If I may, so if we're speaking of the process, the process I refer to as the process that was outlined in the governor's executive order. Item 9, the task force shall prepare and issue a final report prior to December 2018 interim meetings of the legislature advising its findings and recommendations. Number 10, the report of task force finding recommendations shall be submitted to the governor, the Joint Committee on Government and Finance. To my knowledge, that part of the process has not occurred.
So at the last meeting, we continued the thing recognizing,
So my concern is the two processes are very rapidly running into each other, and we convene tomorrow. So this committee is going to make a recommendation to the legislature that convenes tomorrow, and where making a recommendation includes potential legislation, then I believe the task force should come forth with some legislation, or either do it or don't do it. But to come forth with a proposal for legislation for one thing, and then to come forth with a proposal for not legislation, but a recommendation for another thing, I think is problematic, and also calls into question what we're attempting to do. So I just throw that for some consideration as we discuss process.
Well, point of order, but we're discussing a proposal. We're not talking about anything other than this proposal right now that is on our agenda, and that's what we should stay focused at right now and move forward.
Do we not just pass a recommendation to support the legislation that was just provided to us?
Yeah, with that?
No.
You
No,
asked
we
for
didn't.
recommendation.
No, we did not propose that legislation. We
You all-
proposed, yeah, go ahead.
You all decided that the motion was to support the recommendation as it is listed on your sheet of paper. The bill that was put together was something that Senator Blair got ready so you all could see how it would look in a bill, but that is not the task force's work. The task force did not put that together. Senator Blair and his staff was able to put that together as a visual for you all to see what it would look like if it were to be introduced. And he has said he would be happy to introduce it if the task force supported the recommendation. Did I get that right?
Thank you for the clarification.
Okay.
And if we adopt these two recommendations, then it would certainly be in order for us as a task force to then make a motion to make adjustments in this propose legislation and introduce or recommend the legislation based on the task force, so we can make the changes that we wanted to. Right now, we're voting on the concepts, and then we can go and vote on the legislation. And I agree, Dr. Bates, that we should be proposing, as a task force, we should be proposing legislative recommendations. But let's get the concepts down first, and then we can debate the legislation properly.
Chief, if I may ask a question of Ted. A couple of years ago, we had this issue on the table, the 80-20, 70-30. And as a general question, and I believe the board has probably looked at this in the past, but what we're all concerned about is the final cost to any state employee, which includes out-of-pocket and deductibles. And when we put an 80-20 on the table, it's fixed. That takes part of the equation of the cost off the table. So, can you comment as it relates to an 80-20 versus a 70-30 and the effect in the future on deductibles and out-of-pockets and the potential least costly way to the employee? Is that?
I will attempt that.
Okay.
And I'm going to yield to Perry on some of this. The 80-20 legislation we have in place today specifically addresses the premium structure between the employer and the employee. That's all it does. So when you talk about wanting to carve out spouses, well, they're included in that 80-20 legislation. You can't just carve them out. That's part of that legislation. Under the new proposal, as I understand it, what's current 80-20 premium legislation would go away. And what this says is we're going to benchmark the PEIA plan at $1 billion as of some date certain. That's where PEIA costs are. And in the future, should that PEIA cost need to go up by $200 million, the state, through the budget, will allocate 80% of that, $160 million.
No less than.
No less than that. And then the shortfall can be made up by the PI Finance Board either by premiums or benefits, because we no longer have what I would call an 80-20 premium tie anymore. We have an 80, am I saying this right, Perry? Is that what you're intent?
It's a 20% package.
It's a 20%, 80-20 package. So it has no longer, you're no longer setting premiums. You are now giving me money every time you're giving me 80% of the medical trend every
But
year.
that $1 billion is also affected, is it not, by deductibles and various plan components?
Yes, and this will
Yes.
take that into account as well.
So,
Can I respond to that, Chief?
Yes, could you yield to the question after?
Yes. So the idea is that right now, the finance board is in a straitjacket. If you all don't increase premiums, then they have to make reductions. They have to increase deductibles, co-pays, co-insurance. They can't mix and match. They can't say, well, we want to increase premiums because that goes across the board. Everybody pays part of that share. And at the same time, we may want to increase deductibles and co-pays so that those who utilize the system the most would pay the most. And that they can mix and match that in a way to make up the 20% of the employee share. And the idea is to freeze the existing structure so that we no longer look at the total premium and figuring out the 80-20. We look at the growth in the future, and all the existing co-shares that payments that employees are making stay in place, and then we just split the future growth 80-20. And if I might, this goes a little beyond questions, but if you want to fix PEIA, this is the way to do it. We've been here for months, and I've not heard another proposal that would really provide employees a stable, secure health insurance program. we can take a great deal of pride if we pass this and go out and say, because we've taken some criticism, we haven't gotten anything done, but this would make a dramatic change for the employees. I think we take a lot of pride in getting that done. And it provides both the legislature some flexibility, at least 80%, no more than 20% for the employees. It provides the finance board some flexibility so they can, it's not just changes in premiums, they can consider a mix and match of premiums and cost sharing, and it provides some stability for the employees, and something we can take, as I say, a great deal of pride in.
This came out of a collaborative with the meeting with the PEIA.
Okay, anybody else want to speak or have questions about this recommendation?
Well, I've got a question about the recommendation, and maybe I'm just not fully understanding, because the way I understood Dale explaining it was, in this concept of a bank, where, if the legislature allocates 100% of the premiums 1 year.
Of the cost.
Of the cost. Okay, 100% of the cost, which would ensure that there was no premium increase, or co-pays or deductible increase. But the next year, if revenue is down, then we can come in at 70% of that. Now, to me, that, and I'm asking maybe Dale and Perry, that, how does that help a participant in the program to know that there's that much variability in the system?
You can only do that for the 70% on the year after you've made the initial investment above that. So.
Okay.
But it's still going to play, it still has the potential to bite them.
It still has the potential to increase costs by an additional 10%, but this gives the flexibility, whether you want to do it in premiums or whether you want to do it in some combination of premiums and out-of-pocket costs.
Isn't that flexibility in place now?
No.
No.
So, if you want to, the PEI Finance Board cannot increase co-pays or deductibles?
They can't increase, they're required to increase co-pays and deductibles, and they can't increase premiums unless the legislature appropriates additional monies. And then they have no choice. They have to increase the premiums, and they can't say, oh no, some increase in premiums with some co-pays would make more sense. It's a mathematical calculation.
All right. So, because of the 80-20?
Because of the 80-20.
I still think there's that 1 year, you can take the worst case scenario, that there could be a wide range for the participant.
Well, this was a collaborative effort. This was a compromise between Senator Blair and us, and I think it's a very good compromise.
And there was 1 year that the legislature didn't put any additional money into it, and the employees bore $43 or $46 million of the cost, and all of that cost went to the employee. This mandates that all the costs in that situation cannot go to the employee. That at absolute worst, that no more than 30% can be borne by the employee, and that's only after they've built up some banks in that.
Well, I will say through the task force that Christine and others served on, what I heard from the participants was a fear, an anxiety around cost increases that are exorbitant. It wasn't that they couldn't sustain regularly planned, sort of budgetable increases. It's more the wide swings. Here's a 15, 20% increase.
And that's what this does. It doesn't allow for that because they know that you're not going to receive a $46 million influx of money borne solely on the backs of the employees.
Who wants to talk about
For the board, you want the board?
Yeah.
Right. To give the board's perspective, because I think that would serve everybody well here because we're hearing our side on that, but give the board's perspective on how this could help.
Yeah, well, I think that a lot of times the board feels like, Perry, and we've said in the meeting prior, that we're a little handcuffed at what we can do. This allows us, it gives us some stability, as well as the ability to make changes to the plan to update, okay, if need be. giving us that option to change those deductibles, co-pays, out-of-pocket maxes, things of that nature. So it's going to give us tools to help us survive. You know, it's not going to be, medical inflation is not going away, right? So it's going to give us the tools and the ability to combat those forces.
May I ask one question? Will it have a smoothing effect for the recipients on premiums? Whether instead of going like this and this, won't it be more of a?
The way that I understand it, yes. Yes.
It's totally, wow, you might have
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Or here,
Yeah.
okay, who wants to speak?
What I was just saying is that when you speculate about the smoothing effect, it's completely 100% dependent on the circumstances. I mean, it could be much more volatile than the current system. Could be, depending on the manner in which, particularly year over year, I mean, it may be more of a smoothing effect long term, but year over year, it could be more volatile. There's no question it could be. But it's just based on the circumstances.
It's the same as a retirement.
But, I mean, it's not a whole lot different than it is now.
I think our director, if any more task force member wants to speak at this minute, the director of PEIA would like to, I think, weigh in on this.
And I'd like to address your concern. You know, I'm maybe stepping off the line, but the issue is people have been asking for a long-term funding solution for PEIA. The bill is proposed, this option is proposed by Perry, whether you like it or not,
I'm not saying I don't like it.
does provide a long-term funding solution for PEIA. Because what it's saying is if my cost goes up $10 million, 80% of that additional cost is going to be allocated by the legislature as the employer's share, and 10 is going to come from the legislature, and 2 is going to come from the employees. So what we're saying is every year, if medical inflation goes up, the state of West Virginia is going to give PEIA 80% of that additional cost, and the employees are also going to see a 20% increase in cost every year based on medical inflation.
No more than.
Right, no more than, and the finance board then has a discretion to whether that goes to premium increases or benefit reductions. But both parties are going to take a hit every year. And this guarantees at least 20% of the additional medical inflation going to employees.
No more than 20%.
So sorry, does somebody on the telephone want to speak? Oh, he left. Oh, he doesn't want to speak. Somebody else want to be recognized? Do you want to speak to it again?
You don't have to know when to call it out.
All right. Is there any other comments on this or questions?
Just when you would.
Are you ready to vote?
All the questions.
I think we did one, I saw one hand up before she said that.
I just want to get to what, to be clear on what are we doing here? What's the process? What are we about to agreeing to do? So, we're about to vote on what?
The language that you see in front of you that comes as recommendations, not legislation, but as recommendations for the consideration to give to the legislature and the governor for consideration.
So I would propose an amendment
I think that's in order.
that the recommendation be changed to propose changes not to the PA 80-20 rule, but proposed changes to PA 80-20 statutory language.
I'd accept that as a.
There's no such thing as a PEA rule.
We'll accept that as a friendly amendment.
Yeah, what's that, this friendly correction? Okay. Any objection? Because that's essentially what it is. All right, so we're, okay, so it's to the statute. Recommend that the legislature and the governor look at the statute. Because the governor will have to look at the statute too. So it's the vote. You are his task force, but he wants your input as to his policy. It's not, he hasn't adopted it, it's just his, neither one of these are his until he adopts them based on your recommendation. All right, you ready now to vote on this? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the same. Guys, you have the recommendation adopted. Unless there's anything further to discuss, Governor obviously will be addressing PA tomorrow night, so we'll announce another meeting at a certain point after we get more clarity about where we're headed.
And Mr. Chairman, just for the rest of the task force, the statutory subcommittee has a couple other things, particularly with prescription drugs, that we want to look at. That could be cost-saving measures for both the state and the employees. But we felt like these were the major things that we wanted to bring to you right now, get over that first hurdle, and then come back with some additional things during the legislative session so that they can be addressed during the legislative session.
One more question.
Yeah, just in terms, again, process, I have an understanding that the task force will continue on. Can you talk a little bit about your concept?
I've had a brief conversation with the governor about that, and I don't have, right now, he did say keep it continuing. So I have another person to say that's the last word on it.
So if there are other topics that maybe members of the task force want to take a look at, we can bring that forward?
Yeah, through the process.
So you say proper channels, exactly, should I send it to my subcommittee chairman or send it to you?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
We send them to you. Okay.
And we'll work through the staff and see where it should go.
Chief, are there any seats available in the statutory subcommittee?
I'm sorry?
Are there any seats available in the statutory subcommittee? Is the chair of the committee open to additional members?
Yes.
We discussed that briefly this morning. You discussed that.
If you'll look in your minutes from the previous meeting, this subcommittee was formed based on a motion that we made about the change in the 80-20 rule. And when we looked and said that's a statutory and we really need to have more vetting, is when I rescinded the motion on the 80-20, and the motion was made then to set up a statutory subcommittee, and we asked for volunteers to serve on it. Absolutely, if you would like to be added.
Do you want to be
serve on
appointed?
that.
Do you want to be appointed to that?
I'd make the request.
All right.
I'm fine with that as the chair.
We will. I tell you what. Let me go through the governor and see exactly what his purpose is.
Are we done?
Yeah. I will be adjourned for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.